So The Last of Us 7 is now out, and this episode's filled with a ton of Easter eggs, callbacks to the game, and a lot of things that flesh out Ellie's backstory. Based on the Left Behind DLC, that saw us learning more about what happened to her during the time that Joel was at death's door. In the game, originally after he fell off the horse, you had a massive section where you played as her for about an hour, and you had absolutely no idea whether Joel was alive or dead. It was agonising fighting through the infected to discover what happened, but here we find out in the opening that he's okay. He did have a week wait, but yeah, it wasn't as tense as that hour-long session. Now, when The Last of Us Part 1 remake was released last year, I was thinking that they might add in the Left Behind chapter so it happened in chronological order. They didn't though, and Sandman's the only show I've seen come with DLC, so they dropped it in here where it should take place in the story. However, they do skip over a big part of it, dealing with Ellie searching for supplies. In the game, the story was split in half, and we ended up getting two scenarios set inside a mall. Throughout the DLC, you jump back and forth between the two, and in the first you saw what we get in the mall with Riley. In the second section, it was a completely different location set in the present, where you followed Ellie as she looked for supplies. This took you to a crashed military chopper in the area, and you found that the mall was teeming with infected. After getting the supplies, you made your way back to Joel, which is where you had to protect him from hunters who were out for his blood. Now we start off with a snowy abandoned neighbourhood, which we learn is where Joel and Ellie went to after the mall. Upon returning home from hunting, you saw that Ellie had hitched up somewhere like this, and they really managed to recapture the look of the location. Similar to the source material, we find Joel in the basement on a mattress, and Ellie's been doing DIY surgery in order to try and heal him. In there we can also catch an empty tool rack, and these have all been taken and likely used for weapons. It reminded me of the kind of houses you'd find in the game where everything had been picked clean because I'd been spamming the triangle button. Now Joel tells her to go to Tommy, and last week he of course wanted him to take her. His worst fears come true, and he's put her in a lot of danger and is now holding her back. Joel is very much the kind of person who would just ditch someone who was in this position because in this world it doesn't really allow for hangers-on. As she puts the coat on him, I think we see genuine love in his eyes, and he realises this is more than what he's had before. With Tess, she even said that he didn't really love her, and they were just together because they were both good at surviving. He very much sees Ellie as a second daughter though, and she views him as the father that she never had. Now we sort of get a similar plot device to Left Behind, and as something new happened in that, we then cut to the past. Ellie's about to step out of the basement at this point, and we flash back to her in a Fedra training camp. Here we can see that she has a Walkman, and this is something that she also had in the comic. Now, as she runs circuits, we can hear her listening to All or None by Pearl Jam. They're quite an important band in the franchise, and their song Future Days was a thing that constantly popped up throughout. At the time of Part 2's release, there was a big thing about how the song didn't actually get released by the time the outbreak happened. However, Naughty Dog pointed out that they'd done a live show where they played it so the characters could actually know the song. Honestly, I don't think people would have cared because it is quite sad obsessing over this type of stuff. However, the outbreak was moved forward 10 years for the show, so if that song pops up here, I'm gonna f***ing kick off. I'm f***ing furious. This moment is pretty much the Academy in the comics, and it's clear they wanted to tie back to that often overlooked Last of Us offshoot. However, in that we saw Ellie with Riley, whereas here she's already left. The bullies there capitalise on this, and one called Bethany rips her headphones off and taunts her for having no one to fight her battles. It's clear Ellie gravitates towards authority figures, and Riley is very much a prototype Joel protector figure. We learn from Captain Kwong that she's been acting differently the last couple of weeks since Riley left, and her friend departing is another example of someone leaving her. Ellie never really got to know her mother, she was palmed off by Marlene, Tess died, and Joel tried to get rid of her with Tommy. You can see why she told Sam she was tired of being alone like Al Green, and I think it's really good writing to sow the seeds of this in this flashback moment. It's clear everyone has ties to the past they hold on to, just like Ellie does, and we see that even Captain Kwong has trouble letting go. He has a faded picture of his family on his desk, and I'm guessing these died during the initial outbreak. Now Ellie's been thrown in the hole several times before, and instead of punishing her, Kwong wants to give her some advice. He suggests that she aims to be an officer and demonstrates this path by throwing down his keys. The first path is a cub, and the second being keys is symbolic because this will open up doors for her. They also added a really cool little Easter egg on them too, and we catch the Naughty Dog logo on a keyring that Kwong has. Now this conversation and scene is very much another side of Fedra that we haven't seen before. In the game, they are pretty much always your enemies, as are the bandits that you encounter along the way. However, the series has shown things from their point of view because in the game, we were locked to Joel and Ellie's perspective. Really shows you all these kinds of points of views, and it allows you to actually sympathise with them. Kwong believes that Fedra is the only thing holding the world together, and that if they go down, the world will fall apart. In Kansas City, we saw what things were like if Fedra were ousted, and the people there were carrying out murders and just doing horrible things. Fedra also helped to push the infected underground there, and Kathleen's need for revenge unleashed this on her people. Now in her room we catch some dinosaur drawings, and also a picture of some moon cycles. We'll go over what these foreshadows in the spoiler section, but these being Ellie's interests are very, very important. We also get the No Pun Intended book by Will Livingston, and her knife just slightly below it out of view. This is actually volume 1, or as we see Riley busting out volume 2 later on. This is a slight change up from the game, as in those they found it in the mall when coming across a hermit's camp. Riley then read it as you made your way through, whereas here she has it already.
Oh, I got something else.
We also catch Ellie reading a Savage Starlight comic, which I think is titled Negentropy. Anyway, in our episode 5 video, we talked about how these were collectibles that you'd pick up in the game, and the Negentropy issue was something that you came across on your travels. We see the inside of it being a big action scene involving a man and a woman busting their way in somewhere. Probably reaching, but I think this is very much how Ellie views her and Joel, and the guy in the book even looks slightly similar to how he does in the game. Doesn't he? Well, either way, her room is very empty since Riley left. However, it's not too long until she returns, but we get another tour of her room and see some tapes. The top one by Aha foreshadows a great moment in the second game, and the Etta James one plays into this episode later on. I Got You Babe is a song we hear Riley and Ellie dancing to at the end, and this music was also what they jammed away to in the mall on Riley's fateful last night. You also see a poster for Mortal Kombat 2, and this makes a big return later on in the episode. During the third entry, we saw as Ellie and Joel came across a cabinet for it, which in the game was a fighter called the Turning. This starred a character called Angel Knives, but with the show being a Warner Brothers property, they have the rights to use the Mortal Kombat characters. I think that the game developers likely knew this was going to be an Easter egg in advance, and in the recent Last of Us remake, they actually added in a Mortal Kombat 2 poster. Riley then climbs in through the window, and she ends up sticking her hand over Ellie's mouth. This is slightly different to the game, as in that she pretended to bite her. This of course foreshadowed her fate, and let's play the scene side by side so you can see what they kept and also what they changed.
Riley?
Ow. Riley!
Ow. I landed on my hip. What the hell? I thought I was bitten. I know. It was kind of awesome.
Where have you been? What the fuck is wrong with you sneaking up on me like that? It was a joke, okay? I thought it would work better. In my mind, you loved it.
You're not gonna kill me, are you? I haven't seen you, and I don't even know how long. 45 days. Well, 46, technically.
So, how's it going? I thought you were dead. You've been gone for 3 weeks.
Wanna know what I've been up to? All this time, I thought you were dead.
Are you okay? I'm fine. I just ran away for a bit, that's all.
Here. Look. No way.
Where were you?
I joined the Fireflies.
Oh, fuck you.
You're a firefly.
You're a firefly? Jesus.
Are we cool? I disappeared and you're mad. And I owe you an explanation. Let's get out of here and I'll tell you all about it.
We'll tell you everything. First, you have to promise me something.
It's almost morning, and I have military drills. You know, where we learn how to kill fireflies.
So yes.
I'm not going anywhere with you. It's great. It's 2 a.m. and in a few hours I have drills where we learn to kill fireflies.
Put some pants on and let's go.
Get dressed.
So there are some slight changes there, but lots of similarities too. Riley is now a Firefly, and huge shoutouts to our editor Matt for picking up the sort of Romeo and Juliet vibes here with them being on opposite sides. Now I'm actually in the middle of moving house at the moment, and you might notice I've been cleaning things out. I've been cleaning them out. That's why we've teamed up with MacPaw to bring you Clean My Mac X, a brand new program that you need to get if your storage is filling up. If you're a Mac user, then I'm sure you know that Macs don't have a lot of storage and it's very expensive to buy more. Macs store a lot of cache, and if you delete them manually, you can accidentally delete things that you need, which can cause a lot of trouble. It's also very difficult to delete apps. Sometimes when you move them to the trash, the data with them doesn't actually go, and it takes up a lot of storage on the RAM. It's not great for multitasking, it's going to cause a lot of issues, and it'll leave your Mac slower than a heavy spoilers upload after a night out, eh? Me and the team, we use a lot of massive files for video editing. Sometimes they can be like 20 gig big. When you've got hundreds of them on a project, it can really start to take up space on your Mac and just make everything a lot more difficult than it needs to be. However, Clean My Mac X checks out how much unneeded junk you have on your Mac, and it completely cleans it out. This will improve your speed and storage, and generally just make things a lot easier. Why put this additional load on your Mac with unnecessary apps when you can just clean it out in a second with Clean My Mac X? It erases your files securely, gets rid of hibernation files, and just keeps your privacy online extremely safe. It also speaks a number of different languages, so whatever one you use, Clean My Mac X has got you covered. Make sure you check out the link in the description below, go and try it for free now, and yeah, get things sorted out. Now in the game, as you're cutting between timelines, you join Ellie and Riley jumping into an abandoned apartment block, which is where you hear trucks outside.
That was close, huh?
However, here we see them very much moving through the streets as trucks travel through looking for people breaking curfew. They eventually go down into an alleyway and then into this, which is when they bust out the torches. Ellie's doesn't work and she has to hit it, and in the game from time to time you'd have to shake the controller when your light was going off. At this point in the game we learned how Riley became a Firefly, which I'm going to play with the show version so you can see how things slightly differ.
Remember that Firefly you bit and stole his gun?
Yeah, I remember him.
That's Trevor. I saw him walking down the street, so I tailed his ass.
One night, you were in the hole. I got bored, so I snuck out.
I follow him into this alley, and all these Fireflies ambush me. They took me right to their hideout, to Marlene.
I was on my way back, being stealthy like I am, and this chick popped out of nowhere.
Chick like our age?
No, like 40.
Were you scared?
Terrified. I thought this time she would actually shoot me. But instead, she just says, "What took you so long?"
Whatever, anyways, old. She said she was impressed watching me sneak around, avoiding guards.
She was expecting me.
And she just made you a Firefly?
Something like that.
And she asked what I thought about Fedra, so I told her the truth. They're fascist dickbags, and they're the ones that should be getting hanged for their crimes.
That whole almost killing me thing was a test. She wanted to know I was committed.
Oh,
She's like, all right, if you want in, you're in.
that's it?
Now in the show, the woman she's talking about is clearly Marlene, who recruited her personally, whereas in the game she was brought to her. It makes it seem like Marlene's been keeping an eye on Ellie for a long time, and that she's noticed those around her too. Potentially if she had someone on her side that was close to Ellie, Ellie would be warmer to her, and it also explains why the Fireflies didn't immediately kill Ellie when she was bitten. Marlene has a close attachment with Ellie, and her plans to keep her safe and knowing Riley might have helped with that. However, it could also be the reasoning why she shipped Riley off, as she didn't want her running away with her friend. We discover later on that Riley actually asked if Ellie could join her, but Marlene said no. She just wanted to keep her in the QZ, and potentially they may have moved Riley for that reason. Now in the apartment block, they also find a guy who's seemingly overdosed on pills. Ellie and Joel of course come from the same QZ, and it's possible that Joel even sold him these, as they are similar to what we saw him dealing in episode 1. It could be teasing the danger that Joel has around him, and how his actions have a negative effect on people. Now a body lying against the wall like this is also something that very much foreshadows the infected later on. Most of those that had cordyceps ended up with it taking over their body and growing out their face, and they'd eventually hit a point where they knew they were going to die if they didn't become full-on clickers. Thus they'd head to a wall, lay down, die, and grow into it, and in the games they'd spread out spores. Though the one in the mall isn't dead, he's very much following the same pattern, and the body against the wall here, at least to me, sets that up. He collapses through the floor and they take his booze with them and drink it on the roof. Ellie pretends to love it, and this is a complete opposite of the campfire scene in which he spat it straight out. She's trying to impress Riley, and we do see a different side to her here. Now, we learn that it's not the first dead body Riley's seen, and that she's witnessed her parents' corpses. Most of the kids taken in by Fedra were orphans, and this allowed them to train the kids to be soldiers. If you have ties to your family and stuff, you're less likely to be loyal to things like Fedra, especially when they're oppressing the very people you're connected with. Ellie asks to see Riley's gun, and we then see her obsessing over it. This is something she's done throughout the series, and the allure of power means a lot to her as she's not really experienced the bad side of it. At this point they talk about Fedra and also the Fireflies. Riley sees them as fascists, whereas Ellie sees them as holding everything together. Riley thinks the Fireflies are going to bring freedom, but we've already seen from Kathleen the kind of thing it leads to. She ended up promising fair trials, that people would live if they gave up others, and in the end this was shown to all just be a lie. Fedra also do terrible things too. I think what it boils down to is that no matter what happens, the worst traits of humanity will always emerge in some form or another, no matter the side. However, there are good sides too, and obviously these sides have their appeals as well. In the end though, whichever side is in charge will oppress the other side in some form, and thus we get these divisions that lead to others attempting to seek power. When they finally get it, they want to punish the other side, who now become the oppressed ones, and the cycle starts again. Riley later brings up how Fedra have starved people, and in the game when he got to Pittsburgh, he found graffiti talking about how the people there were famished. Ellie said it didn't help that the Fireflies bombed the storage depot, which Riley sees as being propaganda. Hit up any social media site, you're gonna see people talking about the faults in the other political side whilst dismissing their own. But I think Ellie and Riley show we can find common ground with stuff like this. Now Riley says that the Fireflies don't carry out attacks when civilians are involved, but tell that to Tess and Robert. Now in the game there was an extra dimension to this, as there was an announcement that said there hadn't been an infection for 30 days. Riley said this was a lie and that it was just covered up. I was hoping that this would appear in the show, as we of course saw Joel having to burn lots of bodies in episode 1. Now, this scene does kind of mimic the game a bit, as you first run along rooftops before coming alongside the mall like what we have here. The pair then drop down through a collapsed roof and they enter the Liberty Gardens Mall. This is the same as what the location is called in the game, and they do rearrange things slightly. Originally you saw the Typhoon Blitz poster, which was a water pistol that used against Riley during one of the pair's final scenes together. You also came across a tent for a man named Winston, who we learned had been living in the mall as a recluse. As I mentioned earlier, he was who you got the pun book from, and you learned that he died of old age. In this world, that's a big thing, as it's very much survival of the fittest, so making it to that point really means a lot. Now from here you went to the Halloween shop, and then you threw some bricks at some car windows to see who could smash the most. The winner smashed the like button as well, and then from here the characters turned the power on and went on the merry-go-round. Here though, they flipped the power on first before they head into the mall.
So, turns out, the whole city has power. They just flipped the circuit breakers. All you gotta do is flip it back.
So, turns out when Fedra connected that block up to the grid, this place got connected too. Not that they know.
Now at this point we get a scene that's very reminiscent of the game, with Ellie opening up a door into the mall in which we see it all light up. We also have a play on the escalator scene which pulls directly from that.
Check me out, man! This is so cool!
Whoa! Look at me!
This is the first wonder on the date now, and from here we catch a poster for Dawn of the Wolf Part 2. Like Curtis and Viper 2, this was a fictional movie within the Last of Us universe, and here's what they had to say about it in the game.
These posters are everywhere.
I saw this right before the outbreak.
You did? Does he totally gut her by the end?
Nobody gets gutted. It's a dumb teen movie.
Who dragged you to see it then?
I don't know. Let's just stay focused, all right?
I also love the little back in 5 minutes sign, and it shows just how much people were caught off guard. Guy just popped out for a poo and didn't end up coming back. Everything happened really quick, but at least people had time to loot Foot Locker, and probably also get loads of toilet paper. We also get an added lingerie scene with Ellie trying to smarten herself up after Riley makes a joke about imagining her in it. From here we go to the merry-go-round, which pulls directly from the PlayStation Classic. It's probably the most memorable part of Left Behind, and in the game it's during this that Riley gets out the pun book. Symbolically, merry-go-rounds are a sign of innocence and simplicity that puts people in a loop far removed from the world around them. In literacy works, they're often used as sources of magic and adventure, and carousels like this are commonplace at amusement parks as they bring joy to lots of people. This is just the pair enjoying what for them is their last night on Earth before a major change happens. Though Ellie doesn't know it, Riley is well aware she's meant to be going away, and either way, Ellie is about to lose her forever. Now, similar to what happens in the game, the ride breaks down and it spoils the moment. The fun is cut short, and it's very much foreshadowing the journey that lies ahead. Now, we discover that Riley was about to turn 17 and that she'd been assigned to sewage detail. This is all that Kwong thought she was good for, and you can see why she ended up running away. Fedra and the duties assigned to people were very much prisons themselves, and in this world, people didn't really have the freedom to do what they want. No one was lucky enough to just sit around talking about movies all day, and you can see why people gravitated towards the promise of freedom and liberation. Now, on the merry-go-round in the game, Riley busts out the pun book, but here they kind of skip over it, save it for later, and just go straight to the photo booth. Now, the show being set 10 years earlier does mean that they can't bring certain things over, and in the game it ended by asking if you wanted to share your photos to Facebook. Neither knew what that was, and instead you got printouts of the photos before the whole thing shut down. In a nice fourth wall breaking moment, you could actually share the photos you made in game to your own Facebook, and that was an awkward conversation explaining to my dad why I was posting pictures of young computer generated girls. Now, in both the show and game, we get the little bunny mascot, however the name's changed up because of the whole Facebook thing. The game has it being called ShareSnap, whereas the show is Starshot because they couldn't have posted it online. With it being set in 2003, yeah, Facebook wasn't around then, and it's genuinely one of my favourite Easter eggs in the entire show, and I love when they put this much thought into it. Now from here, they go into the arcade. We see machines for Tetris, Frogger, Attack from Mars, and Daytona USA. This was about driving across the country, which may be a link to Joel and Ellie doing it, as there's two seats there. Also, in the game, Ellie jumped in a Jak and Daxter machine, and Naughty Dog, of course, made that game. Also, worth pointing out that Ellie's wearing the shirt that we saw her wearing in episode 1, and this was also the shirt that young Nathan Drake wore in Uncharted 3. Anyway, in the show, Ellie gets to play Mortal Kombat 2, whereas in the game, the turning cabinet didn't actually work. Instead, Riley described the game to Ellie as she had her eyes closed, and he just imagined pulling off the combos. I'm guessing Naughty Dog didn't have the resources to design the mechanics for a fighting game for what amounted to about 2 minutes in the game, but here we catch them playing it out. They go to the Deadpool stage, and at Deadpool is when you bet on who's gonna die. Put my entire house on Riley, and now I'm moving to Vegas, baby. Anyway, Riley chooses Mylena, and she pulls off her fatality, which Ellie described her as doing back in episode 3.
There's this one character named Melina who takes off her mask and she has monster teeth and then she swallows you whole and barfs out your bones.
Now, as they're playing away, we cut to one of the infected who's been awakened by the lights coming on and all the noise. He's located in a toy shop, and this is very much a symbol of innocence, which he ends up destroying. We see 2 dolls here, and this could be a reference to the 2 mannequins in the clothes shop stand, which is where the attack happens in the game. Here, they just shrink it down so that it happens in the Halloween store rather than them going there. I think the change from mannequins to dolls, again, is to hammer home this creepy factor, and also the idea that this is Ellie's childhood being destroyed as things drastically change from this point onwards. She's no longer under the protection of Fedra, and is basically made to flee the QZ with Joel. Now from here, Riley takes Ellie to Macho Nacho. This is another great Naughty Dog Easter egg, and in Uncharted, Nate asked Elena if she actually used to work there. He came across this in the mall and Left Behind as well, and now they've brought it across to the show, with it being where Riley was camped out at. But the pun book comes out, and we hear the ones which also show up in the game.
What did the frustrated cannibal do?
Frustrated cannibal threw up his hands.
I
get it, because he ate his hands.
Lay it on me.
He threw up his hands.
What did the triangle say to the circle?
What did the triangle say to the circle?
You're so pointless.
You're so pointless.
Now in the back, Ellie discovers that Riley's been making explosives and that she was actually posted here by the Fireflies. These look identical to some of the weapons you get in part 2, and as Ellie goes over, you can see that on the top shelf there is a Fedra container. They likely were going to put this in and deliver it, using guerrilla warfare to take them out. Riley promises Ellie that they wouldn't be used on her, but there's absolutely no way that Riley could guarantee that. Say Ellie did become an officer, then she would be the kind of person they'd target, and we see how people are very much forced to go against each other. Now, like the game, we learn this is her last night in Boston, and it plays off the back of this scene.
Ellie, I'm leaving.
They've asked me to leave.
Leave what?
Boston. I'm supposed to join a group in another city.
They're sending me to a post in the Atlanta QC.
I argued with them to stay here.
I asked if you could join so we could go together.
But you know how Marlene is. Nothing's easy with her. Everything's a test.
But Marlene said no.
Who the fuck is Marlene?
Marlene is the lady that helped me get... It doesn't matter.
They're picking me up tomorrow.
Tonight's my last night in Boston.
Why did you bring me here?
I wanted to see you.
Why did you bring me here?
Because I wanted to see you.
No, why did you bring me here?
I don't know.
Now, the Atlanta QZ is also something we hear about in the game when you're in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a city that had overthrown Fedra, and we discover that some of the remnants ended up fleeing and going to Atlanta. In a Halloween store, we see a decoration popping out of a grave, and this is similar to the creature bursting out of the coffin in the game counterpart. Riley gives her the pun book, explaining how she got it, and she talks about the doubt that she has going with them. However, Riley says because Ellie never had a family, she doesn't understand. Even with the bad, you still accept people, and later on when Joel becomes her surrogate father, she very much accepts all the good and bad things in him. Ellie's been put through the ringer, and she goes through how Riley left her, gave her this amazing night, and is then leaving her again. I think Ellie gets so attached to people that she's willing to let them walk all over her to some extent and believe their lies because it's easier than losing them. Riley says she's sure about leaving, and Ellie says that she'll miss her, which is when Riley gives her a werewolf mask whilst Riley gets a clown one. The characters wore both these masks along with a couple of others, and Ellie ended up doing her best roar in the werewolf one, which was a really fun way to start off the mall section. At the end of the DLC, you went to a clothes shop, which is when you had a water pistol fight using the Typhoon Blitz, which you saw a sign for early on. After this, Riley put the tape on, and you danced on top of the table like what we get here. It's side by side time, and just be aware that we've muted the music here for copyright reasons. Bit awkward, but that's YouTube.
People say that we don't know what love is. Really?
Really? Come here.
I got you, baby.
Here. What is it? Hey, what's wrong?
Don't go.
What? Don't go.
In the spring, yeah, I've got you to wear my ring. And when I'm sad,
Sorry.
and when I get scared, always around.
I'm sorry.
So what?
What do we do now?
We'll figure it out.
What do we do now?
We're gonna figure it out.
But I don't think Marlene's gonna go.
Wait.
Now, like in the game, the moment is ruined by the infected. One thing I have criticised the show for is that I think they kind of missed out on the bigger infected moments from the game, such as the skyscraper and the hotel basement sections. This was another where they lessened it a bit and removed the panic of running through the mall. The chase ended with it seeming like you got out, but the scaffolding fell and Ellie plummeted down. Riley jumped back down, and this was very much her giving up her life to save Ellie. Yeah, she ends up saving her as well, but to me the impact of having her jump back into the fire is kind of lessened a bit. Now, we did go back and forth at the Kevin's Spoilers office over why they changed it to the one infected, and our editor Matt actually said that she wouldn't have been as scared of the Horde in episode 5 if she'd already seen one. That was the first time this version of Ellie experienced it, and therefore it wouldn't have made sense if she'd seen one before. Personally, I think it's just a budget thing, and having to film a chase through a mall would obviously cost a fucking load, and you'd have to loot more than Foot Locker to get that back. Should call it Loot Locker, not the time or place. Anyway, back in the present, Ellie goes up into the house and desperately searches for something to help Joel. Shout out to all my gamers who know what it's like hammering that triangle button constantly as you open up every drawer for just a little bit of cloth or something. Now the frustration Ellie has here is mirrored in the past, with her lashing out in anger and smashing the glass like it's a button with a thumbs up on it. We get a similar shot composition to the game, and in the end, Riley makes a pact that they just lose their minds together.
There's some more stuff over there you can break.
There's more stuff over there you can break.
The way I see it, we got two options.
The way I see it, we got two options.
Option one, you take the easy way out.
One, we take the easy way out.
It's quick and painless. I'm not a fan of option one.
Quick, painless. No, I don't like option one.
Two, we fight.
Fight for what?
Option two, we just keep going.
We're gonna turn into one of those things.
There are a million ways we should have died before today.
It ends this way for everyone sooner or later, right?
And a million ways we can die before tomorrow. But we fight for every second we get to spend with each other.
But we don't quit. It's 2 minutes. Or 2 days. I don't want to give that up.
Whether it's 2 minutes or 2 days, we don't give that up. I don't want to give that up. My vote? Let's just wait it out. You know, we can be all poetic and just lose our minds together.
We could just be all poetic and shit and lose our minds together.
What's option three?
What's option 3?
Sorry. Come on.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Let's get out of here.
This is also a line referenced in the game by Ellie when she discusses her past.
Austin, back when I was bitten, I wasn't alone. My best friend was there. And she got bit too. We didn't know what to do. So, she says, let's just wait it out. You know, we can be all poetic and just lose our minds together.
Also did a bit of deep digging, and the mall in the game was apparently built in 1968, with a show, of course, starting off in that year. Now back in the present, Ellie finds a needle and thread so that she can stitch Joel up. Make sure you sanitize that, mate, yeah? It's been sat in a drawer for 20 years, probably causing infection. Oh, never mind, in you go. But clearly, Ellie is fighting to keep Joel going, and this is clearly because she lost Riley. She doesn't want a repeat of that, and she very much mirrors Joel not wanting to go through losing his daughter again. They found each other and someone to fight for, and we end with Ellie stitching up his wound in order to stop the bleeding. This shot is framed to mirror the ending of last week's episode, and whereas that was a dour note to finish on, this is a more hopeful one. That closes out the episode, and before we get into the spoiler section of the video, I thought I'd give my thoughts. As a standalone thing, I did enjoy this adaptation of the Left Behind DLC, but I don't know if I'm a bit too close to the game, as I think some parts paled in comparison, and was just hoping things like the Horde and the Winter Mall sections would have been carried across. I think at this point I'm kind of just accepting that the series will always just strip back the games that mainly focuses on the human moments. I do think that leaves stuff being sort of repetitive at points though, and every episode other than 4 and 6 I believe basically introduces 1 or 2 new characters that they then kill off at the end. So it is all good to be fair, but I think this formula almost stops it from being great. Those first 5 episodes especially were classics, but the last 2 have kind of dropped for me personally. Still good, but yeah, I just feel the constraints of the series are starting to show a bit. Now, Storm Reid did a really good job as Riley, and though I probably sound like I'm bashing it, I do think that viewed in a vacuum that this episode's really good. I just think that the show as a whole, it needs a bit more variety from the formula that we're getting. Maybe I am too close to the game, like I said, but it never really felt like they were following a format, or if they were, then it wasn't clear from that initial playthrough. Anyway, if you're loving the show and everything that it does, then hopefully you can at least see things from my point of view. And if you haven't played the game, yeah, go play. You know, we're lucky that we have both these 2 adaptations, and there's definitely going to be people who are like, well, I prefer the game, and people who are like, I prefer the show. So yeah, everyone's going to have their own choice, but I'm sure you can tell from me, from how much I love the game and all the stupid little references in it, that I really do love it. Anyway, that takes us to the spoiler section. And yeah, we have a couple of things that tie heavily into part 2. Now, most of the items in Ellie's room have a payoff down the line, and at one point we catch those dinosaur drawings and also some moon cycles. In the arcade, Ellie also asks if the next surprise is a dinosaur, and these all tie together for where Joel takes her on her birthday. The pair go to a museum, and this is filled with dinosaur exhibits as well as a NASA one that Ellie ends up getting into. Been through that a number of times, so sorry for constantly repeating it, but they also referenced it around the campfire last week. Now, the Aha tape and Take On Me playing in the mall returns in a big moment during part 2 as well. At one point, Ellie comes across a guitar in a music store and she picks it up and plays it to Dina. It's a great version and I wanted to play it in the video, but we got hit with copyright claims, so I can't. But I'm going to serenade you with it now as we fade out. So you've got to either listen to me or click a video on the end screen. Talking away, I don't know what I'm to say, I said click a video anyway. That's an air, it's okay. Shine it for me, come on. You would say if you'd be safe and sorry, come on, take on me. Take on me, take me on